diving into procrastination today. And, you gave me this really interesting mix of sources to look at. We've got Mind Tools, the McGraw Center. There's even a tip sheet from ECU.
Yeah.
And, they all seem to agree procrastination. It's not just about being lazy.
Right.
There's more to it.
Yeah, it's a lot more interesting than that. It's really fascinating how all of these sources highlight the psychological components of procrastination, like the fear and anxiety that often fuel it. It's like our brains are trying to protect us from negative feelings, even if it ends up backfiring later on, you know?
Yeah, like we hit the snooze button on those tasks that feel difficult or just overwhelming.
Totally.
I thought the McGraw Center's take on the specific fears was interesting.
Yeah.
They talk about fear of failure,
Right.
fear of judgment,
Mm-hmm.
and even fear of success.
Absolutely. And that's a key insight. I mean, just understanding those fears is the first step towards tackling them. Let's say you have to prep for a big presentation at work, but you're putting it off.
Uh-huh.
That fear of judgment might be whispering in your ear saying, what if you mess up and everyone thinks you're incompetent?
Yeah, I've definitely been there.
Oh, yeah, we all have. And then you have the fear of success, which is a little less obvious.
Right.
Imagine you nail that presentation, you get a promotion, but suddenly you're the go-to person for every single project.
Oh, wow.
That can be a lot to handle, right?
Yeah, for sure. So even success can make us anxious, leading to us putting things off to avoid those potential downsides.
Yeah.
Mind Tools also talks about this perfectionism trap.
Oh, that's a good one. For perfectionists, it's not about laziness. It's about setting the bar so high that even starting feels overwhelming.
Right.
So they'd rather avoid the task entirely than risk doing it imperfectly.
It's that all or nothing mindset, right?
Exactly. It's either perfect or it's a complete failure. And all of these fears, fear of failure, judgment, success, imperfection, they create this anxiety that makes it really hard to just sit down and get things done. That's why the McGraw Center points out that focusing just on time management doesn't always enough.
Mm-hmm. Right. You could have the most perfectly organized schedule.
Yeah.
But if you're constantly battling these underlying fears, you're still probably going to put things off.
You're exactly right. That's why it's so crucial to address the psychological roots of procrastination. We need to understand those fears, challenge those negative thoughts, and find healthier coping mechanisms.
It sounds like we're talking about managing our minds, not just our time.
Totally.
Now, both the McGraw Center and that ECU tip sheet, they both stress finding productive reasons to engage with tasks.
Yes, they do.
It's about changing our motivation, going from external pressure to internal drive.
Absolutely. Instead of being driven by fear of failing or needing to please others, we need to connect with our own goals. We need to find a genuine interest in what we're doing.
Right, so it's shifting from I have to do this to I want to do this.
Exactly.
But how do we make that shift?
That's where actionable strategies come in. ECU has this interesting approach called the worst first method.
Okay, worst first. Tell me more.
It's very straightforward. Tackle the most daunting task first thing in the morning. You get it out of the way, and then the rest of your day will feel much easier.
Yeah, so you face your biggest fear head on, and suddenly everything else feels more manageable. I like that.
Exactly. Plus, it frees up so much mental space. You're not carrying that dread around all day. And ECU also offers this technique for dealing with those moments where you suddenly realize you've been procrastinating.
Uh-huh.
Like when you remember that big report due next week that you haven't started yet.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling.
They call it the remember forgetting technique. Instead of getting down on yourself for procrastinating, you use that moment of realization as a trigger for taking immediate action, even if it's just a small step.
So you turn it into a moment of productivity instead of like spiraling into guilt and shame.
Exactly.
And what about the tasks that just feel too overwhelming to do all at once?
ECU suggests what they call the bits and pieces approach. Instead of focusing on the entire task, just start with a small piece of it.
Okay.
If you're writing a paper, just choose the topic today. Tomorrow, do some brainstorming. Breaking it down to the little chunks can make the whole thing feel less intimidating.
Right, it's like climbing a mountain, It's easier to focus on reaching the next base camp than staring at the giant summit in the distance.
Exactly.
ECU and Mind Tools both talk about breaking tasks into smaller steps.
That's right. It's a classic time management strategy, but it's especially useful for getting over procrastination. By breaking down a large project into smaller, more achievable milestones, the whole process feels less intimidating.
Right, and you get that sense of accomplishment along the way.
Exactly, and that feeling of accomplishment is really motivating.
It is like, okay, I did that, now I can do this.
Exactly. It builds confidence and keeps you on track. Now, for those days when you just can't seem to get started,
Yeah?
Mind Tools has this technique they call the 15-minute burst.
15-minute burst. Okay, I'm listening.
It's as simple as it sounds. Commit to just 15 minutes of focused work on whatever you've been avoiding.
Okay.
Oftentimes, getting started is the hardest part. Once you get going, you might find yourself continuing for much longer.
Yeah, it's like tricking your brain into getting started. And once you're over that hurdle, it's much easier to keep going.
Exactly. And don't forget about rewards. Mind Tools reminds us to set up a system of rewards for completing tasks.
Oh, yeah, I'm a big believer in that. It's important to give yourself something to look forward to. It helps you stay motivated, and it helps you celebrate your accomplishments.
Absolutely. Focus on rewards that you genuinely enjoy and that are meaningful to you. It shouldn't feel like checking boxes. It should be about making the whole process more satisfying.
Yeah, so instead of something you feel like you should do, choose something you actually look forward to, whether that's a relaxing bath, a special treat, or an evening out with friends.
Exactly. Speaking of making things more enjoyable, let's talk about minimizing distractions.
Oh, minimizing distractions. Yeah, that's huge. Our world is so full of distractions these days.
You're telling me Mind Tools has some good advice on this. Create a dedicated workspace, turn off notifications, and limit access to those tempting distractions like social media. It's about setting yourself up for success.
It's so easy to get sucked into the rabbit hole of social media or just browsing online.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's something we could all use a little bit of.
And finally, don't be afraid to ask for help. ECU reminds us that we don't have to go it alone.
Right.
Sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective or a little guidance to get you unstuck.
Absolutely. Whether it's reaching out to friends, classmates, tutors, professors, don't hesitate to ask for help.
Yeah,
You might be surprised how helpful a little assistance can be.
for sure. It really is all about having a supportive network, tapping into the collective wisdom around you. Mind Tools also reminds us about the importance of our internal dialogue, something we can actually control.
Yeah, like how we talk to ourselves about the tasks in front of us.
Exactly. So instead of saying, I have to finish this report,
Right.
try saying, I'm choosing to focus on this report now so I can have a free evening later.
Huh.
It seems small,
Yeah.
but it can really shift your whole mindset.
It's like you taking ownership of it rather than it controlling you.
Right. It's empowering.
Yeah.
And that feeling of being empowered can be so motivating. Speaking of motivation, ECU emphasizes being kind to yourself. We're not perfect, and we all procrastinate sometimes.
That's a good reminder. We can't expect to be productivity robots all the time. We need a little grace, especially when things are tough.
Absolutely. It's not about reaching some impossible ideal of productivity. It's about progress, not perfection.
I like that. Progress, not perfection.
Celebrate the small wins, learn from those setbacks, and keep going.
Yeah. Now, Mind Tools brought up something that really interested me. Active procrastination. Sounds kind of contradictory.
It does, doesn't it? It's not about avoiding work entirely. It's more like strategically delaying certain tasks so you can focus on the really urgent ones.
So it's a calculated decision, not just giving into distraction.
Exactly. Mind Tools suggests this approach can actually work for some people, especially those who thrive under pressure. Maybe they wait till the last minute on purpose just to tap into that adrenaline.
Yeah, I could see how that might work for some, but for others, I think that kind of pressure would be paralyzing.
Oh, yeah.
So it's all about knowing yourself and what works for you.
Absolutely. And Mind Tools does say it's important to be mindful of how it affects others. You don't want to leave your team hanging because you pushed a deadline too close.
Right, finding the balance between your own work style and being responsible to your team.
Right. Now, when it comes to getting stuck, which can lead to procrastination, Mind Tools recommends checking out their decision-making tools.
Yeah.
Oh, those can be so helpful, especially for breaking down complex decisions, making those hard calls. Indecision can be a huge form of procrastination. It's like you're frozen,
Yeah.
unable to move forward.
And while we're on getting unstuck, ECU has this really interesting strategy called self-monitoring. Sounds kind of like detective work.
It is, in a way, you're paying attention to your own procrastination patterns and identifying those triggers that make you put things off.
So like becoming aware of the thoughts, feelings, situations that lead to procrastination.
Exactly. So once you know your triggers, you can start to come up with strategies to, catch them before they happen.
Gotcha.
ECU also suggests keeping track of the excuses you use when you procrastinate.
Okay.
It's like shining a light on those justifications we give ourselves.
Right.
Like, I'll do it later, or I work better under pressure.
Yeah, sometimes those excuses can sound pretty convincing, even if they're not really true.
Right. By becoming more aware of them, we can start to challenge them and come up with more productive responses. ECU also encourages us to think realistically about the tasks we're avoiding. They ask, how bad is it really?
How bad is it really? Yeah, that's a great question. I think we build things up in our minds sometimes, making them seem scarier than they are.
Totally. It's about gaining perspective and, challenging those catastrophic thoughts that can feed procrastination.
Yeah.
Like, oh, if I mess this up, I'm going to get fired.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Our minds can be our worst enemies
You're
sometimes.
telling me. And ECU reminds us that procrastination is often linked to unhelpful thinking traps, like believing we're not confident enough or that everything has to be perfect.
Yeah,
Those thought patterns can be really destructive, setting these unrealistic expectations that make it feel like you can't even get started.
right. It's like setting yourself up for failure from the beginning.
Exactly. ECU encourages us to reframe those thoughts. Instead of dwelling on those perceived shortcomings, try focusing on learning and accepting that mistakes are just part of the process.
Yeah, that's a much healthier way to approach it. It's about growth and learning, not some impossible standard of perfection.
Right. And finally, ECU reminds us to consider the cost of procrastination. They ask, what else could you be doing if you grant procrastinating?
What else could you be doing? Wow, that's a good one. I think it shows that procrastination isn't just some harmless quirk, it has consequences.
Yeah,
It can steal your time, your energy, your opportunity.
exactly.
It can stop you from pursuing your passions, building relationships, you know, or even just enjoying life.
Yeah, so it's not just about getting things done, it's about living a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
It's about making sure your actions line up with your values.
And that brings us to a really important point that weaves through all these sources. Procrastination is not a fixed personality trait.
Oh, that's good news. It means we're not stuck with it. There's hope.
Exactly. It's a habit, and habits can be changed.
It takes time and effort and a willingness to try different things to see what works for you.
Yeah.
And remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Start small, celebrate the wins.
Absolutely, because every step you take to overcome procrastination is a step towards a more productive, more fulfilling, and more empowered life.
I love that. And now let's shift gears a little and look at something we haven't really talked about yet, the role of emotions in procrastination.
Oh, I love this. Because, yeah, we talked about fear and anxiety, but there's a whole range of emotions involved. Sometimes we're not trying to avoid negative feelings, we're chasing positive ones.
Wow, can you talk about that a little more?
Sure, sometimes we procrastinate just because we're looking for pleasure, distraction, that instant gratification.
Uh huh.
Like we choose the immediate reward, like watching a funny video, instead of tackling a task that's not so exciting.
Right. So it's not always about avoiding pain, it can be about seeking pleasure. But of course, that becomes a problem when it keeps getting in the way of your goals.
Exactly. It's about finding balance between those short term pleasures and, making progress on the things that contribute to our long term satisfaction.
Yeah. I imagine boredom can be a big part of it too.
Absolutely. If a task feels tedious or uninspiring, it's natural to want to put it off.
Right.
But the key is to try to make those tasks more engaging. Can you break them down? Set mini challenges. Connect them to your interests.
Those are good ideas. And what about feeling overwhelmed or lacking confidence? I think those can really contribute to procrastination.
Absolutely, you're right. When something feels too big or complicated, it's easy to feel like we're not up to the task.
Yeah,
And that can make us avoid it entirely. But it's important to remember those feelings don't have to control what we do.
right. We can choose how to respond. We can choose to break things down, ask for support, build our skills, step by step.
Exactly. And that's where self compassion comes in.
Self compassion. Oh, something I'm always working on.
It's so important because instead of beating ourselves up for feeling overwhelmed or inadequate, we can, offer ourselves encouragement and support. We can remind ourselves that we're capable of growth and we don't have to have all the answers right now,
Yeah,
right?
I love that. It's like being your own best cheerleader, especially when you're struggling.
Exactly. Now, there's another emotion that doesn't come up much when talking about procrastination: resentment.
Resentment. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, sometimes procrastination can actually be a form of rebellion, like against the demands and expectations that are put on us, especially nowadays in our fast paced world.
Right. So it's like saying, no, I'm not going to do what you want. I'm going to do what I want.
Right, it's about reclaiming control. But like any rebellion, you got to think about the consequences.
That's true. Procrastination might feel like taking back control in the short term,
Yeah,
but it could lead to more stress and negative consequences later.
right.
So, how can we use this understanding of emotions to actually overcome procrastination?
The first step is just becoming more aware of the emotions surrounding it. Pay attention to how you're feeling before and during those times when you procrastinate.
So, you become kind of an emotion detective.
Exactly. Once you've figured out those emotional triggers, you can come up with ways to handle them. For example, if you find yourself procrastinating when you feel overwhelmed, maybe you need to find ways to deal with stress.
Like taking breaks, being more mindful, or even just asking for help from others.
Exactly. Or if you're procrastinating because you're bored or uninspired, maybe you brainstorm ways to make those tasks more exciting. Setting challenges, incorporating things you actually enjoy, even collaborating with others.
And if it's coming from resentment or feeling like you have no control, maybe you explore ways to reclaim agency in your life, like setting boundaries, focusing on your values, or even seeking opportunities for more independence.
It's really about understanding the emotional roots of procrastination and coming up with your own personal strategies to deal with them.
Because if we can learn to manage our emotions effectively, we're less likely to let them sabotage our goals and well being. It really is about taking control and steering your life where you want it to go.
And that leads us to another really important piece: self compassion and procrastination.
Oh, yeah, that's something I'm always working on.
It's crucial because a lot of times we actually make procrastination worse by beating ourselves up about it. All that negativity just makes things harder.
It's like that saying, you can't hate yourself into a better version of yourself.
Exactly. Instead of all that self criticism, what if we tried to understand the feelings that lead to procrastination in the first place? Treat ourselves with the same kindness we would offer a friend who is struggling.
It's about remembering that we're all human, we make mistakes, and that's okay.
And research actually shows that self compassion isn't just about feeling good, it can actually help motivate us to change. When we're kinder to ourselves, we start to believe we can improve.
So it's like you're creating a more supportive environment inside yourself instead of constantly battling with self criticism.
Exactly. Going over all these sources, there's a common thread: this idea that procrastination is very often rooted in fear.
Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of success, even the fear of uncomfortable emotions themselves.
It's like we try to shield ourselves from these perceived threats by putting things off, but as we talked about, that avoidance strategy often backfires.
It leads to even more stress, anxiety, and missed opportunities later on. So, how do we go from feeling stuck in fear to taking action?
It starts with acknowledging those fears, challenging the thoughts behind them, and then finding the courage to step outside our comfort zones.
Right, because when we face those fears, we open ourselves up to so much more creativity, growth, and a sense of really being in control of our lives.
And that's the ultimate payoff, isn't it? Reclaiming our time, our energy, and our dreams, becoming the authors of our own stories.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into procrastination, is there one main takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
More than anything, remember you're not alone in this. Procrastination is incredibly common, and there are so many resources, strategies, even communities of support out there.
And it's a journey, not a destination. Remember, progress over perfection. Every step forward is a victory.
You gave me some really fascinating material to work with today, and I hope this exploration has given you some useful insights and practical steps to start tackling those procrastination habits.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into procrastination. Until next time, remember you've got this.